everybody, my name is Jackie and welcome to Prairie Sports Talk, the podcast where we talk about sports that directly impact the Canadian Prairie. Today is August 31st, 2024, and it is Labor Day weekend, the best time of year in the CFL, and we have a lot to talk about. So we're going to talk about some interesting news stories from last week and an interesting debate around a very controversial CFL rule. But before we get to that, we're going to recap what happened last week. And then to end the episode off, we are going to talk about my predictions for Labor Day weekend. Let's get into it. Week 12 in the CFL opened up with a very intriguing matchup between the Toronto Argonauts and the Saskatchewan Roughriders. This game went down to the wire and had a very controversial finish. The finish was made on the correct call, but it's the rule that is controversial. So, let's start in the first half. The Riders' offense looked solid in the first half. They were producing, consistently getting downfield, though they weren't necessarily getting into the end zone a whole lot. They were playing solid and they were moving the ball. In the second half, however, the offense dried up. And that might be an understatement. Trevor Harris, he played okay. He went 18 for 29 for 190 yards and a touchdown. That's not horrible. It's not quite the Harris we've come to expect, but those are still decent numbers. Except for the fact he threw 2 interceptions, including a very costly pick 6. He has had a solid season when he's been healthy. But this was not the Harris we've come to expect. This was not the Riders' offense we have come to expect. They looked really solid in the first half. But just like a week ago against Montreal, they dried up in the second half. They were unable to do almost anything as soon as the second half began. And I see a lot of people online blaming this on Trevor Harris. Now, if you're one of those people who think that Trevor Harris should be replaced by Shea Patterson, you're wrong, because at the end of the day, this is Trevor Harris's team. Harris is still the man in Saskatchewan, at least for this season. I'm not saying that they won't have a new quarterback next season, but I am saying that Trevor Harris is their quarterback this season. In my opinion, there is no reason to pull him unless he is injured. He is not blameless in this past game, but to put all the blame on him would be a mischaracterization of how this game went. And speaking of offenses, let's talk about Chad Kelly. Now, I'm not going to talk about all the controversies surrounding him. I did that in a bonus video last week. If you are interested in my thoughts and opinions on that, the link for the video will be in the description down below. But on field, Kelly looked solid. He threw for 322 yards, which is nothing to scoff at. He had a very good game. He started quite slow, but as the game went on, he looked more and more like last season's MOP. He played solid, didn't throw for a touchdown, and he did throw an interception, but like I said, he still played decent. And outside of Harris and Kelly, there were three other notable stories. So, from least notable to most notable, first we have the fact Brett Lawler got back on track this week. After having a very rough game against Montreal 2 weeks ago, he looked like himself this past week. Lawler went 4 for 4 on field goals and drilled the only extra point he was asked to drill. He looked like the Lawler we have come to expect from him from his time in the league. He looked very solid. And he ended up getting the Rough Riders Player of the Week as voted on by the fans. He looked solid. Basically, the vibes in Saskatchewan surrounding him have just kind of done a full 180 once again. Like, you could be walking down the street and see Brett Lauderdale tying his shoe across the street, and it wouldn't be unrealistic to just have some random guy look at him and yell, "That's my kicker!" just simply because he's tying his shoe. Lauderdale is very much beloved by the Rider fans, and though the fans here can be very, very quick to turn on a player, they can also forgive him just as quick, as we have seen with Lauderdale. And then the next notable story, the Rough Riders defense. They had an insane game. They came up huge repeatedly. They had four takeaways, and 3 of them were goal line stands, creating turnover on downs. I don't think I've ever seen that in my life. That is absurd. And CJ Reavis was a huge, huge part of this this ability to stop the Argos on the doorstep. He had numerous major tackles in the red zone, including a few on third down, and he ended up leading the team with 10 tackles. He had a very good game. And now we gotta talk about the ending of this game. This game ended on a missed field goal. It was 1919. Highwalaw, who came out for the Argos, and he kicked it wide. But it went through the end zone. In the CFL, that is known as a Rouge. That is a single point. Mario Elford didn't have a chance to grab the ball, didn't have a chance to return it. Argos win 2019 because they missed the field goal. That is not a very good ending to this game. It was a very fun back and forth game, and just for it to end because the winning team misses a field goal, that doesn't feel right. Now, I will talk about the Rouge more in this episode later. I don't want to get too much into it now. But before we do move on to the next game, I do want to talk about how the Riders have been struggling recently. In the last 7 games, they have 1 win. They have gone 1-6-1. Over their last win was week 7. That was way back on July 19th. That is ages ago in the CFL. I don't know what's wrong with this team. They keep coming close to getting wins. They're right there almost every single game, but they just can't finish it. I don't know if it's the team still trying to adjust to an entirely new coaching staff or what's going on. But whatever it is, I hope this team gets it figured out soon, because they have a great roster and a great coaching staff. They just need to finish games, really. I don't think this is any single person's fault. I think the team is just somewhat low on confidence. And I think it will just take 1 win for them to just get back to how they were playing from week 1 till week 7. And then we move on to Winnipeg defeating Hamilton 26-23. This should have been a blowout for the Bombers. This shouldn't have been close. But after Winnipeg had a very, very good first half, they took their foot off the gas in the third quarter. That allowed Hamilton to outscore them 17-3 in just that quarter. That is absurd. They had a 17-16 lead headed into the fourth. Now, Winnipeg did manage to get an important touchdown, and that ended up giving them the chance to win the game. But Hamilton should have been able to hold on when they had that lead. They should have been. But they're just such a bad team this season. And because of that, Winnipeg should not have been in this position. They should have just kind of walked through Hamilton like it was nothing. They should have seen the Ticats as just a gentle breeze on a fall day. And you're just going on a brisk walk. That's all it should have been. But they had to run through them like a brick wall. Yes, the Bombers got the win, but that's because they got back into it in the fourth. Would this happen against a better team? I don't think it would have. I really don't. And both quarterbacks in this game, they're future Hall of Famers. And they're both having probably the worst careers of their season. Bo Levi threw for 50%. That's it. He went 14 for 28. He did manage to get 220 yards, but that's it. No touchdowns. And then you look at Zach Collaros on the other side. What is going on with him this season? He threw 3 interceptions in this game and only 1 touchdown. His touchdown to interception ratio is an abysmal 6-12. If he throws just a few more interceptions, he will have thrown the most in his career in just a single season. In the one season, he threw 33 touchdowns and 15 interceptions. 15 interceptions is his career high, and that was just last season. He has 12 so far this season. This could end up being his worst career season. I don't know what's going on with him this season. I think he might be getting to the point where he needs to consider, can he still compete in the CFL? Because at this point in time, I'm not convinced he can. And then we move on to a very, very interesting game. Ottawa defeats BC by a score of 34-27. And the big story in this game was the quarterback matchup. Drew Brown, he has grown into a star in this league. In this game, he threw 28 for 37 for an absolutely insane 390 yards. He threw 3 touchdowns and only 1 interception. He has looked tremendous this season. I can't wait to see what the future holds for him. I really enjoyed watching him grow into potentially one of the next superstars in the CFL. And then Nathan Rourke on the other side, he's off to a bit of a slow start. He played okay. He showed flashes of what we saw from him in 2022, but this is not the Rourke we were expecting. He went 22 for 31 for 234. He threw an interception and no touchdowns. He played okay. It's not the Rourke we were expecting, but he did show flashes that he is potentially starting to get back to the Rourke we expect. And Ottawa, let's talk about their receiving core real quick. They had 3 players, 3, over 90 yards receiving. Braylon Addison had 5 receptions for 92 yards. Nick Maud, I'm going to struggle with this because of my speech impairment, but Maldonado, he had 3 receptions for 95 yards and a pair of touchdowns. He had a great game. And then Justin Hardy, 11 receptions for 114 yards. Absolutely absurd that they had 3 players do this in the same game. But unfortunately, there was also a very, very scary moment for the Red Blacks and the CFL as a whole. Jalen Acklin was left immobile because of a very scary collision. I'm not going to go too in depth on it, but he ended up being taken off the field in an ambulance with his family in the back. You never want to see someone go down like this, ever. You don't want to see anyone go down, period, but like this, it's especially hard. I want to give my best wishes to his family and him, and I just hope he ends up being okay. And finally, we move on to the Montreal Alouettes beating the Edmonton Elks 21-17. Edmonton came out flying in this game. They looked really solid. But Montreal, at the end of the day, showed their mental toughness by being able to claw back into this game. They were down 17-6 headed into the second half. But Jason Moss rallied the troops, and the Alouettes ended up managing to claw back into this game and pitch a second half shutout and win the game 21-17, as I mentioned. Fajardo also made his return this week after being on the injured list for about a month or so. And he looked solid. He did. He went 22 for 34 for 336 and had 2 touchdowns, only 1 interception. He hasn't missed much of a beat. Yes, he threw 1 interception, but I mean, that's still a very solid game. He looked solid. And despite losing, Edmonton showed that they're not the pushover team they were earlier this season. Yes, they were unable to score in the second half. But I think if Trey Ford was able to play this game instead of McLeod Bethel-Thompson, they probably end up winning this game. Ford is currently injured, but I think once he comes back, Edmonton could be a force to be reckoned with in the CFL, and they could end up not just making the playoffs, but potentially making some noise. I'm very excited to see what they're able to do for the rest of the season. Let's talk about some roster changes for the Montreal Alouettes. So we're going to start with the controversial one first. But it's not controversial for the reason you may think it is at first. The indefinite suspension of Sean Lemon has now been upheld by an arbitrator. The CFL suspended Sean Lemon this past offseason indefinitely because he gambled on a game he was taking part in back in 2021 as a member of the Calgary Stampeders. I have talked about these allegations more in the past. I will link to that episode in the description down below. And the controversy comes not because he's been indefinitely suspended. It's because this effectively shows the CFL is more concerned about if their players gamble on games they are involved in than they are concerned if players violate their gender-based violence policy like Chad Kelly did. Let me be clear. I think the CFL has made the correct decision with the Sean Lemon case individually. Sean Lemon should not be playing in this league if he has gambled on games he has been involved in. He should not be in this league if that is the case. End of story. But Chad Kelly also shouldn't be in this league because he has violated the gender-based violence policy. Like I said, I talked about that more last week in a video that is linked in the description down below, so I don't want to get too much into that. But at the end of the day, this is likely the end for Sean Lemon's career. Yes, he's probably going to appeal the decision, and I'm not sure if that's going to allow him to play like he has this season, or if he'll have to be on the sidelines. But I highly doubt we are ever going to see him in the CFL again. I think this is likely the end of the world for the 36-year-old. And now, let's talk about something more interesting. Austin Mack has been re-signed by the Alouettes after a short stint in the NFL. And just a few days after signing in Montreal, he has signed a max-length 4-year extension. The second-year receiver had a tremendous first year back in 2023 where he had 78 receptions for 1,154 yards. That is absurd. He had a very good season last year in his rookie season. And now he will be around long-term because, as I mentioned, he has been signed to a 4-year contract. I am struggling to think of the last non-quarterback to be signed to a max-length contract. This is very scary for the rest of the league because the Alouettes have a very good team, and now that they've added Austin Mack to it long-term, I'm kinda scared if I'm being honest. As I mentioned earlier in the episode, the Saskatchewan Roughriders lost to the Toronto Argonauts because the Argonauts missed a field goal. The field goal went through the back of the end zone and was ruled a single point because of the Rouge. The Rouge is one of the rules that helped the CFL differentiate itself from the NFL. There was a good amount of these rules, but the three biggest ones are the fact that the CFL plays on a larger field, the fact that they play with 12 players instead of 11, and the Rouge. Removing any of these rules and making them uniform with the NFL would be a mistake. So, what can be done to prevent teams from losing because the other team makes a mistake in the future? I have seen a lot of weird ideas thrown around online about changes to the Rouge and how the rule could be improved. But the one that I keep seeing pop up time and time again, and the idea that I personally like, is changing it so that the Rouge only counts if the kick is returnable. If the CFL outlines specific things that make a kick returnable, such as the ball being catchable by the returner or the ball bouncing on the ground before going through the end zone, then it can be a Rouge. But if the ball goes through the back of the end zone without touching the ground and is too high for the player to catch, that is not a Rouge. That is just a missed field goal or whatever. And they start with the ball on the 35 just like they would on a regular Rouge. I think that's a good balance because it incentivizes returners to still return the ball, because if they catch it and kneel, they still give up the 1 point. So if they take it out, they're no longer giving up the point, but also provides the risk that they won't be guaranteed to start at the 35. And it also, at the same time, prevents things like this. Because at the end of the day, winning because you missed a field goal, winning because you made a mistake, that is not what sports is about. Let me know what you guys think about this. I'm very curious to hear other opinions on this. And now we move on to my predictions for Labor Day weekend. It is finally here, the best part of the regular season for the CFL. This is a week full of intense rivalries and fun matchups. So we begin the week with probably the weakest of the 4 matchups. We have Ottawa visiting BC, a rematch of last week's contest. I think BC wins this game. I think the home field advantage is going to push them over the edge. I think Nathan Rourke is going to look like the Rourke we expect, and he's going to have a very good game, probably right around 300 yards passing, potentially well over that, but I'd say 290 is the minimum he's going to get this game. Drew Brown's going to also have a very good game for Ottawa. I think this is going to be a very high-scoring back-and-forth game, but I think BC places energy, just pushes the Lions over the top, and they win probably by less than 7 points. And then we move on to my game of the week. You know what? No, scratch that. This is my game of the regular season. Winnipeg visits Saskatchewan. This is what CFL football is all about. This is rivalries. This is intensity. This is a game where everything that has happened up to this point in the season no longer matters for this game. It doesn't matter if this was a winless team going against an undefeated team. This is such an intense rivalry that every single game between these two teams could look different. Like, you could have the same game played in the same conditions by the same two teams and have two completely different results. Labor Day is all about rivalries, and this, in my opinion, is the biggest rivalry in the CFL. Now, with that said, Saskatchewan wins this week. I think Saskatchewan wins Labor Day this week. They take the season series against Winnipeg, but I think Winnipeg's also going to beat them next week. Now that, I want to make this clear, that prediction is not set in stone. Let me see how this week plays out before I make my predictions for next week. But I think the Riders win this simply because at the end of the day, this game means more for the Riders than it does for the Bombers. Not just because it's Labor Day, but because at the end of the day, the Riders need a win right now more than they need anything else. As I mentioned before, they are 1-6-1 in their last 7. They need something now. And if there's any time in the season to provide a spark, it's Labor Day weekend. I think the Riders win, but I think this goes down to the wire, and it's going to be a very, very fun matchup. And then we move on to Toronto visiting Hamilton. I think the Argos win this, and I don't think it's close. This is another rivalry where usually it doesn't matter what's happened in the season up to this point. It could go either way. But Hamilton, let me put it this way. I think most Canadian college teams could beat the Ticats this season. I think the Argos run through the Ticats like they're not even there. This shouldn't be close. And we finish with the Battle of Alberta. Edmonton versus Calgary in Calgary. I think this is a very, very intriguing matchup this season, especially this week, because these are two teams that they're both kind of just hovering around the middle of the CFL and just kind of jockeying for position in the West. I think this is going to be a back and forth matchup. It's always back and forth when these two teams play, but I think this season, Edmonton just barely beats Calgary. I think this comes down to the final play of the game. I think Edmonton wins, but I think it's going to be very, very close. But that is everything I have for you guys this week. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. And if you're on Spotify, be sure to follow the 13th Man Podcast Network. I hope you guys have a great day. I hope you guys have a great night. I hope you guys have a great whatever. Stay safe, stay strong. You got this. And this is Jackie for Prairie Sports Talk signing off.